There comes a moment in a person's life when the world stops being a familiar place and starts revealing itself as a layered, shifting, symbolic landscape. A place not of surfaces, but of meanings. A place where every gesture carries intention, every silence holds a message, and every human interaction becomes a mirror reflecting the unseen architecture of the soul. This is the moment of awakening, not the romanticized version sold in books, not the aesthetic kind you can imitate online, but the raw, irreversible shift of consciousness that changes the way you perceive everything. And once this shift happens, you can never go back, because spiritually awake people move through the world with a different kind of sight, a sight that doesn't come from the eyes, but from the integration of the conscious and the unconscious. The sight that Jung believed was the highest function of the human psyche, the ability to see reality not as we wish it to be, but as it is. And this sight, this inner vision, is something others cannot understand until they awaken themselves. Spiritually awake people see the hidden script behind human behavior. They see the wounds beneath the words. They see the intentions behind the smiles. They see the truth woven between the lies people tell themselves. They see the emotional contracts people sign unconsciously. They see the shadows people project onto others because they're too afraid to face them within themselves. And this sight, this depth of perception, is both a blessing and a burden, because once you can see people clearly, you can no longer participate in their illusions. You can no longer pretend not to notice the games, the manipulation, the insecurity disguised as confidence, the fear disguised as anger, the hollowness disguised as ambition. You no longer get trapped in the surface level chaos that consumes the unconscious mind, because you recognize it for what it is, a shield, a symptom, a story. Spiritually awake people see patterns where others see coincidences. They see cycles where others see misfortune. They see lessons where others see punishment. They see opportunities for evolution where others see obstacles. They see destiny forming through the smallest decisions. This is because awakening sharpens perception, refines intuition, and dissolves the fog of conditioning that keeps most people blind to themselves. And once the fog lifts, life stops being random, it becomes symbolic. Everything means something. Everything is connected. Everything is part of a grand psychological and spiritual unfolding. Awake people see the architecture of the psyche, the way a sculptor sees the statue hidden inside a block of marble. They can sense the potential behind the fear, the wisdom behind the pain, the power behind the trauma. They can recognize the alchemy happening within them, the transformation that occurs when the ego begins to crack and the self begins to emerge. Nietzsche understood this when he wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And Aziz, spiritually awake people see the why behind every how. And that alone changes everything. Because the spiritually asleep navigate life reacting to external events, while the spiritually awake navigate life responding to their inner truth. One moves through life like a leaf in the wind. The other moves like a mountain in a storm. And this difference, this internal anchoring, is why awake people appear calm in situations that unsettle others. They see the hidden workings of fate. They see the deeper purpose behind disruption. They see the lesson encoded inside suffering. They see the new chapter forming beneath the collapse of the old. They see that every loss is a clearing. Every ending is a door. Every setback is a summons. Awakening gives you the ability to sense beginnings inside endings. It gives you the ability to see people not only as they are, but as they are becoming. It gives you the ability to detect when someone's soul is speaking and when their ego is speaking, and the difference becomes unmistakable. To the awake, the ego sounds loud, chaotic, defensive, threatened. The soul sounds quiet, honest, steady, undeniable. Others cannot hear this distinction, but you can. You hear it immediately. You feel it intuitively. You read it effortlessly. Awake people see emotional truth like a color, vivid, unmistakable, impossible to hide. They can feel the tension behind someone's forced laughter. They can sense the insecurity behind someone's arrogance. They can detect the longing in someone's anger. They can perceive the fear beneath someone's control. They can recognize when someone is wearing a mask, even when the person believes the mask is their real face. This sight is not judgment, it is awareness. It is not superiority, it is perception. It is not mystical, it is psychological clarity. This is why spiritually awake people confuse, intimidate, or unsettle those who cannot see as deeply. Because when you can see people with clarity, you become unpredictable to them. You no longer play the roles their unconscious expects. You no longer feed their insecurities. You no longer validate their illusions. You no longer participate in emotional games. You simply see, and seeing changes the entire dynamic. Because you cannot manipulate someone who sees. You cannot deceive someone who sees. You cannot guilt someone who sees. You cannot control someone who sees. Spiritually awake people perceive motives that others hide even from themselves. They sense when someone is speaking from fear rather than truth. They detect when someone is withdrawing not because of disrespect, but because of their own wounds. They can feel the unspoken tension in a room the way a musician hears the slightest change in pitch. Awake people don't just see situations, they see through them. They see the unconscious contracts between lovers, the unspoken resentments within families, the hidden competition among friends, the self-sabotage disguised as bad luck, the emotional immaturity disguised as righteousness, the trauma responses masquerading as personality traits. This sight becomes both your compass and your shield. It guides you toward what resonates and away from what drains you. It protects you from people who would confuse your empathy for weakness. It shields you from dynamics that would have trapped you before you awakened. It keeps your energy sovereign, your mind clear, and your soul intact. But here is what spiritually awake people see that others cannot. They see the truth behind everyone's behavior, including their own. They see their own shadow with the same clarity they see others. They see their own flaws, wounds, and patterns without flinching. They see when they are projecting. They see when they are avoiding. They see when they are shrinking. They see when they are lying to themselves. This is why awake people are humble, not proud, aware, not arrogant. Awakening forces you to confront yourself so thoroughly that humility becomes natural. You can't cling to illusions after you've seen your own unconscious. You can't pretend to be superior after you've met your own shadow. You can't condemn others after you've witnessed your own darkness. This self-honesty is something the spiritually asleep cannot understand because they are still running from themselves. Their entire identity is built on avoiding confrontation with their inner world. But spiritually awake people do not run. They dive, they explore, they descend into the psyche, like miners searching for gold in the darkness. And they return with a treasure others cannot comprehend. Clarity, perception, inner authority, freedom. Freedom not from the world. Freedom from the illusions the world tries to impose on them. This sight changes the way you love. It changes the way you choose people. It changes the way you walk away. It changes the way you speak, act, and respond. It changes what you tolerate, what you pursue, and what you refuse. Because once you awaken, you stop trying to control life and start trying to understand it. Others see chaos. You see patterns. Others see obstacles. You see initiation. Others see coincidence. You see synchronicity. Others see endings. You see evolution. This difference is not small. It is everything. It is what separates those who are mastered by life from those who master themselves within it. And spiritually awake people carry this mastery silently, without boasting, without trying to convert anyone, without trying to prove anything. Because awakening is not loud, it is sovereign. They see the difference between someone who wants to grow and someone who wants to stay the same but look spiritual. This sight is piercing. It is powerful. It is liberating. And it is only the beginning. Spiritually awake people see timelines long before they unfold, not because they can predict the future, but because they can read the present with uncommon clarity. They recognize the seeds within every action. They sense the trajectory behind every decision. They feel the undertones of every relationship, where it leads, what it demands, what it will ultimately reveal. Others call it intuition. Awake people know it is perception sharpened by inner stillness. For when you are no longer blinded by your wounds, you can finally see the truth of what stands before you. When you are no longer numbed by distraction, you can feel the subtle shifts in energy. When you are no longer lost in internal noise, the external world becomes transparent. Awake people can sense when a chapter is ending before any signs appear. They can feel when someone's presence is fading before the person admits it. They can detect when an opportunity is misaligned before it collapses. They can intuit the hidden lessons coded into suffering long before the healing arrives. It's not magic, it's consciousness. It's the ability to read life symbolically instead of literally. The spiritually asleep look at events the way a child looks at shadows, with fear, confusion, and misinterpretation. They run from what disturbs them. They cling to what soothes them. They refuse to see the deeper patterns unfolding. But the spiritually awake look at shadows the way Jung intended, as revelations. They know that the psyche is always speaking, even when the words are hidden. They understand that the world outside is a reflection of the world inside. They observe their emotional reactions not as truths, but as teachers. Awake people see meaning where others see inconvenience. They see psychological architecture where others see drama. They see spiritual symbolism where others see coincidence. They can feel when a person's soul is injured. They can sense when someone is pretending. They can detect authenticity like a tuning fork. They can read between every line of conversation. They can observe the micro expressions that reveal fear, longing, jealousy, grief, or desire. Nothing is random to them. They walk into a room and feel the emotional temperature instantly. Who is anxious? Who is threatened? Who is hiding something? Who is hurting? Who is insecure? Who is present? Who is pretending to be present? This is because spiritually awake people don't listen with their ears, they listen with their nervous system. They don't watch with their eyes, they observe with their entire consciousness. They don't interpret with their ego, they interpret with their soul. Others call this overthinking. Awake people recognize it as advanced awareness. People who are asleep see events. Awake people see dynamics. People who are asleep see conflict. Awake people see emotional triggers colliding. People who are asleep see betrayal. Awake people see unconscious self-preservation. People who are asleep see abandonment. Awake people see misalignment. This is why spiritually awake people rarely take anything personally. Not because they don't care, but because they understand. Understanding is the end of suffering. You no longer get angry because you no longer misunderstand the origin of people's actions. You no longer chase love because you can sense when connection is not reciprocal. You no longer cling to relationships because you know souls drift apart when their lessons are complete. You no longer fear endings because you know endings are encoded into beginnings. And this sight, this higher vision, gives awake people a trait the unconscious cannot grasp: detachment without coldness. They are not distant, they are discerning. They are not unfeeling, they are unentangled. They are not detached from life, they are detached from illusion. They are not indifferent, They are inwardly anchored. Awake people can love with depth without losing themselves. They can walk away peacefully without resentment. They can connect without becoming dependent. They can give without expecting repayment. They can forgive without reopening the door. They do not need to be understood, validated, or applauded. They simply need to be aligned. This is what others cannot see, that the awakened do not operate from the same psychological plane. They are no longer guided by lack. They are guided by resonance. They choose people by energy, not appearance. They choose paths by intuition, not pressure. They choose responses by awareness, not emotion. They choose boundaries by clarity, not fear. This is why spiritually awake people appear different, not superior, but sovereign. They walk with a kind of quiet conviction, a grounded confidence, a deep inner calm that unsettles those who still depend on chaos to feel alive. Awake people see the cost of staying in places where their soul is shrinking. Others see comfort zones. Awake people see cages. Others see familiar patterns. Awake people see karmic loops. Others see tradition. Awake people see inherited trauma. Others see rules. Awake people see conditioning. They question everything not out of rebellion, but out of responsibility. The responsibility to be conscious, to be authentic, to be aligned, to be awake in a world where sleep is the norm. Awake people see when others are operating from childhood wounds. They see when someone is projecting unresolved pain. They see when someone is emotionally unavailable long before the person admits it. They see when someone's love is conditional long before the truth reveals itself. They see when someone's intentions contradict their words. And this ability to see clearly gives spiritually awake people a kind of emotional X-ray vision, not intrusive, but intuitive, not analytical, but embodied, not calculating, but perceptive. They know when to speak and when to remain silent. They know when to stay and when to leave. They know when to give and when to withhold. They know when to act and when to wait. This timing, this mastery of inner rhythm is what others mistake for luck. But it is not luck, it is alignment. Others fall apart under pressure. The awake remain centered, not because they are immune to pain, but because they have walked through their inner storms and learned how to navigate them. They do not fear their emotions, they understand them. They do not deny their shadow, they integrate it. They do not suppress their truth, they embody it. And once you embody your truth, reality reorganizes around you. People who once drained you fall away. Opportunities that once eluded you reveal themselves. Paths that once felt impossible open effortlessly. Energy that once leaked out of your wounds now fuels your purpose. Because spiritually awake people see something most others never recognize. Life is not happening to them. Life is happening through them. Spiritually awake people see the world not as a stage they must perform on, but as a living dialogue between their inner and outer reality. They recognize that every moment, every encounter, every challenge, every silence is a message not from some distant cosmic force, but from their own unconscious inviting them deeper into alignment. Others wait for signs, the awake interpret them. Others seek meaning, the awake recognize it. Others fear uncertainty, the awake enter it. Because awakening teaches you that uncertainty is not a void, it is a doorway, a threshold, a sacred threshold where the ego loses its grip and the soul takes the lead. Awake people see potential where others see risk. They see pathways where others see dead ends. They see transformation where others see destruction. They see rebirth where others see ruin. This is because the awakened have lived through their own destruction. They have experienced the collapse of identities, relationships, beliefs, and illusions. They have felt the world fall apart inside their chest and discovered the self that rises from the ashes. After you've died psychologically, the world can no longer kill you emotionally. Awakened people carry this fearlessness quietly, not as bravado, but as embodied truth, not as arrogance, but as inner stability. They do not panic when others panic. They do not cling when others cling. They do not chase after illusions that no longer resonate. They do not crumble in the face of uncertainty. They trust the deeper currents of life because they have felt them firsthand. Awake people see synchronicities not as coincidences, but as alignment in motion. They recognize when life is whispering. They notice when the same theme repeats. They feel when a lesson returns in a new disguise. They sense when the universe is slowing them down or speeding them up. To the asleep, these moments go unnoticed. To the awake, they form the fabric of destiny. Awakened people see time differently, not as a linear sequence of events, but as a psychological landscape. They sense when their future self is pulling them forward. They feel when their past self needs forgiveness. They recognize when their present self requires rebirth. Others see days passing. The awake see evolution unfolding. And because they see evolution so clearly, awake people live with a fierce intentionality. They no longer want what the ego wants. They want what the soul requires. And the soul requires depth, honesty, purpose, integrity, intensity, silence, expansion, truth. Awake people see truth even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. They see when a relationship has expired. They see when their job is suffocating them. They see when their environment is shrinking their spirit. They see when their habits are betraying their potential. They see when their future demands a version of them they haven't yet become. Others resist truth until it becomes unbearable. The awake seek truth before it becomes crisis. Because awakening doesn't make you perfect. It makes you aware. Awake people see the battlefield of the mind. They witness the ego fighting to stay alive. They observe the fears trying to regain control. They recognize the inner critic as a relic of old conditioning. They understand that every emotion is a message, not a master. And because of this, awake people no longer drown in their emotions. They decode them. Anger, a boundary was crossed. Fear, a part of them is asking for protection. Sadness, a story needs to be released. Anxiety, a misalignment is demanding correction. Loneliness, the soul is calling for deeper connection, not with others, but with themselves. Awake people see emotions as symbols, not threats, as guides, not punishments, as data, not identity. This emotional fluency is something the spiritually asleep cannot comprehend, because the asleep fear their emotions. The awake dialogue with them. Awake people see that every emotional reaction has a root cause, a childhood wound, an unmet need, a past betrayal, a trauma response, an egoic fear. And once you see the root, the reaction loses its power. This is why spiritually awake people don't explode outward. They implode inward, quietly, intentionally, transformatively. They turn every reaction into reflection, every conflict into introspection, every trigger into a map, every pain into a portal. And through these portals, they evolve. This is what others cannot see. That awakening is not an event, but a lifelong process of turning inward, with courage, with honesty, with relentless self-awareness. Spiritually awake people see the invisible threads connecting them to others. They feel when a soul contract is complete. They sense when a lesson is learned. They know when a connection has served its purpose. They can tell when someone enters their life with karmic significance. The asleep call it fate. The awake call it resonance. Awake people see people for who they truly are, not for who they pretend to be, not for who they want others to think they are. not for the facade they've meticulously crafted. They see the child within the adult. They see the fear behind the anger. They see the longing behind the rejection. They see the self-sabotage behind the excuses. They see the potential beneath the mess. And they love with this vision, not blindly, but truthfully. Awake people do not fall in love with illusions. They fall in love with souls, not with masks, but with essence, not with perfection, but with authenticity, not with performance, but with presence. And here is the most misunderstood sight they possess. Spiritually awake people can see when someone's soul is not meant to walk with them, even if their heart desires it. They do not chase what isn't theirs. They do not cling to what must leave. They do not force what's misaligned. They do not attach where growth is impossible, because they see the truth, and truth guides them more strongly than desire ever could. Awake people see their path clearly, even when it's difficult, even when it's lonely, even when it's uncertain, even when it demands strength they haven't yet learned to hold. Others postpone their destiny. The awake walk toward it, not because they are fearless, but because they are faithful, faithful to the self, faithful to the soul, faithful to the inner wisdom that never misleads. Awakened sight is not a gift. It is a responsibility. It is a burden. It is a liberation. It is a rebirth. Spiritually awake people see the subtle wars taking place inside every human being. They see the battle between the ego and the soul, the fight between fear and truth, the tension between who someone pretends to be and who they are called to become. Most people walk through life unaware of this inner battleground, repeating patterns they never chose, defending beliefs they never examined, and carrying wounds they mistake for identity. But the awake, they see the battlefield clearly. They see when someone's ego is speaking from scarcity. They see when someone's soul is whispering beneath the noise. They see when someone is acting from pride because they fear being vulnerable. They see when someone is pushing them away because they fear being abandoned. They see when someone is sabotaging themselves because success feels unsafe. Awake people see the programming that shapes human behavior: childhood conditioning, unresolved trauma, inherited fear, cultural expectations, psychological defense mechanisms. They see the compulsive patterns driving people into cycles of heartbreak, conflict, frustration, and stagnation. They see the unconscious beliefs that rule a person's life like a silent tyrant. And because they see the architecture of suffering, they no longer judge it. They understand it. They empathize with it. They witness it with compassion because they have confronted their own suffering and dismantled their own illusions. Awake people are not surprised by the darkness in others. They are only moved by one question: will this person face it or run from it? Because that single choice determines everything. It determines whether someone grows or repeats, whether they awaken or regress, whether they become conscious or remain a prisoner of their past. Spiritually awake people also see what is absent in a person: the unchosen paths, the unlived potential, the suppressed dreams, the abandoned gifts. They see what someone could be if they stopped lying to themselves. They see the greatness hidden under fear, the brilliance hidden under doubt, the power hidden under shame. They see the self, the real, unconditioned, untrained, unfiltered self, even when the person cannot see it yet. This sight is why awake people become catalysts, not through force, not through persuasion, not through preaching, but through presence. Their very existence awakens something dormant in others: a hunger, a longing, a recognition, a memory of who they were before they were conditioned to forget. Awake people hold a mirror, and in that mirror others glimpse their potential, sometimes for the first time. But here is the paradox: people will often mistake the mirror for the threat. They will blame the awakened person for triggering discomfort, not realizing the discomfort is their soul trying to rise. They will resent the clarity awakened people carry, not realizing that clarity exposes their own distortions. They will envy the peace awakened people embody, not realizing peace is the byproduct of inner confrontation. Yet awake people see beyond the resentment, beyond the reaction, beyond the egoic defense. They see the soul behind the struggle, the desire behind the denial. Because spiritually awake, people see with the eyes of the self, and the self never despises its own reflection. This same sight gives awakened people a kind of emotional foresight. They sense when someone is about to outgrow a relationship. They feel when a friendship is reaching its end. They know when a connection will evolve, fracture, deepen, or dissolve. Not because they're psychic, because they are perceptive. Others react to changes when they explode. Awake people feel changes when they whisper. They see microshifts in tone, energy, behavior. They notice inconsistencies others overlook. They pick up on patterns before they become consequences. This is why spiritually awake people rarely experience sudden heartbreak. They see the ending long before the final moment arrives. They have already processed the truth before the other person speaks it. Awake people also see the hidden cost of staying in places that shrink their soul. They know when a job is killing their creativity. They know when a city is draining their spirit. They know when a routine has become a cage. They know when a relationship has become a spiritual graveyard. Others wait for collapse. The awake move before collapse because they see what collapse is preparing to reveal. Awake people see purpose in pain. They see direction in disruption. They see potential in uncertainty. They see inner strength forming inside every struggle. Pain does not break them. It refines them because they see what the asleep cannot. Pain is not punishment. Pain is information. Pain is evolution. Pain is the psyche reorganizing itself. Pain is the soul pushing you toward your next version. And when you see pain this clearly, you stop fearing it. You walk through it with intention. You let it sharpen you instead of shatter you. This is why spiritually awake people are resilient. Not because they are desensitized, but because they are aware others drown in emotions. Awake people decode them, others cling to suffering. Awake people alchemize it, others fear solitude. Awake people seek it, others get lost in their mind. Awake people descend into their soul, and this descent gives them a vision the world desperately needs. Awake people see that every human being is not just living a life, they are living a story, a myth, a psychological journey, just like Jung described the journey from the unconscious to the conscious, from the fragmented self to the integrated self, from survival to sovereignty, from fear to truth. Spiritually awake people see this story unfolding in every person they meet. They see the archetypes playing out, the shadow, the hero, the orphan, the caregiver, the warrior, the magician. They see which chapter someone is in, which lesson they are resisting, which truth they are hiding from. Because awakening teaches you this. Every human being is a myth in motion. Some are stuck in the prologue. Some are drowning in the conflict. Some are avoiding their turning point. Some are resisting their transformation. Some have not yet realized the pen is in their own hand. And spiritually awake people see this with a clarity that cannot be unlearned. They see the story behind the story, the meaning behind the moment, the soul behind the mask, the destiny behind the detour, the lesson behind the chaos. They see the invisible world shaping the visible one. They see what others cannot because they have learned to see inwardly, and inward sight changes everything. And so we arrive at the truth that every spiritually awake person eventually discovers, the truth they can never unsee, the truth that separates sight from blindness, awakening from illusion, and destiny from repetition. The world you perceive is not the world that exists. It is the world you are prepared to see. And spiritually awake people are prepared to see everything. They see the architecture of human behavior with the clarity of someone who has walked through their own labyrinth. They see the cycles of fate turning beneath the surface of ordinary life. They see how the unconscious governs the masses, how fear shapes decisions, how ego shapes identity, how conditioning shapes destiny. They see the currents beneath the waves, the roots beneath the tree, the truth beneath the mask, the soul beneath the body. They see the invisible world that others deny because acknowledging it would demand transformation, and transformation is the one thing the unawakened fear most. But the awake do not fear transformation. They seek it. They invite it. They embody it, because they understand that the human spirit is not meant to remain stagnant. It is meant to evolve, expand, ascend. It is meant to shed skins, dissolve identities, outgrow illusions, and rise into greater versions of itself. Awake people see that life is not punishment. It is initiation. Every heartbreak is a portal. Every loss is a teacher. Every betrayal is a revelation. Every ending is a beginning. Every collapse is a redirection. Every silence is a message. Every pain is a sculptor shaping the soul into something more aligned, more conscious, more whole. Awake people see that nothing is random, nothing is wasted, nothing is meaningless, nothing is accidental. The universe is precise, the psyche is intentional, the soul is organized, the path is exact. And when you awaken, you begin to trust this precision. You begin to trust the intelligence behind your experiences. You begin to trust yourself, not as a concept, but as a living compass, a living oracle, a living truth. Others search for answers outside themselves. The awake know the answers were always within. Others chase purpose. The awake become purpose. Others cling to certainty. The awake walk into the unknown with open hands, because they understand that the unknown is where their soul speaks loudest. Awake people see that their life is not a sequence of circumstances. It is a dialogue with their destiny. Every moment asks a question. Every experience offers a choice. Every difficulty demands evolution. Every blessing confirms alignment. They see that the universe does not speak in words. It speaks in synchronicities, intuition, impulses, opportunities, endings, redirections, longings, and inner knowing. And this sight changes everything. It changes how you walk. It changes how you breathe. It changes how you love. It changes how you live. It changes who you become. Because spiritually awake people do not become better versions of themselves. They become truer versions of themselves, more honest, more grounded, more sovereign, more aligned, more conscious, more free. And once you taste this freedom, the freedom of seeing clearly, living intentionally, loving deeply but without attachment, acting purposefully without ego, and walking through the world with eyes that pierce illusion. You cannot go back to blindness. You cannot pretend not to know yourself. You cannot pretend not to sense the truth. You cannot pretend not to feel misalignment. You cannot pretend not to hear your intuition, because awakening is irreversible. Once the eyes of the soul open, they never close again. And here is the final revelation, the one the spiritually asleep cannot grasp, but the awake carry like a quiet flame within their chest. Spiritually awake people see that the greatest power in this world is not control, not influence, not dominance, not validation, but consciousness. Consciousness is the root of all transformation. Consciousness is what turns suffering into wisdom. Consciousness is what turns endings into evolution. Consciousness is what turns chaos into clarity. Consciousness is what turns loneliness into alignment. Consciousness is what turns fear into wholeness. Consciousness is what turns life into art. And when you see through consciousness, you see everything. You see the illusions others cling to. You see the truths others avoid. You see the paths others fear. You see the potential others suppress. You see the patterns others repeat. You see the lessons others resist. You see the freedom others deny themselves. You see, with unshakable clarity, that the purpose of awakening was never to escape the world, but to finally meet it with awareness, to meet it with sovereignty, to meet it with a soul no longer asleep. And now you carry this sight. You carry the vision that cuts through illusion. You carry the discernment that protects your spirit. You carry the wisdom that shapes your destiny. You carry the inner light that no darkness can extinguish. You carry the gift the unconscious world cannot understand. You see what others cannot, and what they have forgotten how to see. You see the truth. You see the path. You see the self. You see life unfolding through you. And from this moment on, you walk not as someone searching for meaning, but as someone who embodies it. You walk as an awakened soul in a world still learning how to open its eyes.